Welcome back. This time we're talking about Suicide Squad, the latest installment in DC's new combined cinematic universe. Directed by David Ayer, it takes a group of DC villains ranging from the iconic to the downright obscure and putting them together into this team, sort of like the Dirty Dozen, with the idea that they could be sent on missions that if they die, who cares, and if they fail, they can be disavowed. Now, there's been a lot of anticipation for this movie ever since the first trailer hit at Comic-Con last year, and interest has only been growing since Batman v Superman divided fans and critics. Now, if you've seen my video for that film, you know that I liked it more so than most. But even with that, I was going into this movie hoping that this was going to be an improvement. I liked the work of David Ayer, both as a director and a writer. He wrote Training Day. He went on to write and direct such films as End of Watch and Fury, and I thought he was the perfect choice for this gritty, dark look at the superhero world from the view of the villains. And although I do my best to avoid looking at any other reviews or headlines before going into a movie, the early reviews for this and the backlash that resulted was hard to ignore. So I went into this trying to be as open-minded as possible, and I have to say, this film is not as good as a lot of people were hoping it would be, but it's not nearly as bad as some of the early reviews would make you think. Now, just before the movie started, a friend of mine texted me a one-sentence synopsis of his thoughts, because he had just gotten out of it right as I was going in. And my feeling on this movie ultimately was pretty similar, so I'm going to paraphrase him and add a few words, but essentially what I would say is this is not a great film. I would not call it a great film, and story-wise, I probably wouldn't even call it a good film, but this is an entertaining film. It definitely has problems with the story, the pacing, the villain, but considering this movie had to introduce us to so many characters, many of which have never appeared in any film form before, I have to say, I really liked the characters and actually felt and cared for them by the end, which I would say is one of the three primary goals of this movie. Get us to understand and care about these characters, tell a coherent story, and entertain us. And I would say it succeeded on 2 out of those 3. I would not call this story coherent in any sense of the word. But what is the story? Essentially, you have this government agent, Amanda Waller, played here by Viola Davis. If you're familiar at all with the DC animated universe of the 90s, especially the Justice League cartoons, you're familiar with Amanda Waller. She was one of my favorite characters from that cartoon, and as a fan of DC Comics, I always enjoyed her appearances in the comics. Well, in this movie, as a result of the things that happen in Batman v Superman, she wants to create this team to be able to face off against the next Superman if he turns out to be a bad guy. And what better way to fight bad guys than with more bad guys? And it turns out that she has collected a group of metahumans, people with powers, that she can utilize for this team. And primarily they include Harley Quinn, Joker's girlfriend, played by Margo Robbie, Deadshot, the world's greatest assassin, played by Will Smith, Captain Boomerang, a renowned thief, played by Courtney, Killer Croc, played by, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name, but he was Echo in Lost, and Diablo, a pyrokinetic, played by Hernandez. And rounding out the possible team members is June Moon, an archaeologist possessed by an ancient witch spirit named the Enchantress, played by Cara Delevingne. I have no idea if I got that right. And the man designated to lead this ragtag group of villains is Rick Flag, played by Kinnaman. And as you can tell, that's a lot of characters, and that's not even the half of it, because we also have the Joker, played by Jared Leto, as well as a late-comer to the team, Katana, played by Karen Fukuhara. Now, I don't want to spoil the story, but essentially they have all of these people in this high-security prison. And something happens, and they need to activate this team to save the day. And, of course, they're not actually told what they're saving the day from, but they're just forced to go on this mission or they're going to die. and the only carrot they get is they might get a few years off of their sentence. So that, in a nutshell, is the story. And like in Jurassic World, where they were trying to use the dinosaurs for military purposes, the idea of using these highly dangerous, highly powerful supervillains to do good, you could debate that 7 days out of the week. Now, this is based on an idea from the DC Comics that's been around for the decades and has produced some really interesting and compelling stories. And one of the things I really liked about this movie, as I alluded to before, they do develop some really compelling storylines for some of these characters. Specifically, Harley Quinn, Deadshot, Enchantress, and Rick Flag, of all people. And they definitely get the majority of the screen time and the character development. And of course we have the Joker, who is on his own mission to essentially save Harley from this prison. I will say I enjoyed Jared Leto's performance as the Joker in this. Nothing taking away from him. I will say he was a bit overshadowed, having just recently watched the animated version of The Killing Joke, in which Mark Hamill was voicing the Joker. He's always been one of my favorite Jokers of all time, so coming into this, Jared had a lot to live up to. And frankly, the script doesn't give him a lot to do in this movie. I know he's essentially trying to play the wild card, and I don't want to give away anything of what happens later in the movie, but while I enjoyed his scenes in the Harley Quinn flashbacks as we were learning about her character and why she is the way she is and acts the way she acts, his present actions in this movie, he kind of just comes in and then leaves, and then comes in and leaves, and essentially he's never there long enough to have a lasting impression character-wise, and story-wise ends up being more of a distraction than anything else, because we're trying to actually focus in on this story, on what the Suicide Squad, their mission and everything else, and even though the mission itself is a little ridiculous, I was enjoying learning more about these characters and how they were reacting to these situations, more so than the Joker showing up and acting semi-crazy and then leaving again. And I haven't seen any other reviews, but I'm going to go on a little bit of a limb here and say that I think this movie would have actually been improved by less Joker. And that's not taking anything away from Jared Leto's performance, it's just story-wise, he was not necessary. And although I could talk for days about the downright ridiculousness of a lot of the plot developments of this movie, I think its biggest weakness is the villain. And again, I don't want to get any specifics because it would be a little bit of a spoiler, but essentially we have that, and it's not uncommon these days in these superhero movies. I can think of Thor 2, another movie I enjoyed, but let's face it, wasn't a great villain. Guardians of the Galaxy, not a great villain either. In this case, we have another sort of just their placeholder villain to do villainy things so we can have our heroes do their thing. And then I think I'm coining a term here, and I'm going to stick with it, faceless minion syndrome. Because essentially the minions that our heroes, or our villains in this case, have to battle through the course of the second and third acts of this movie are essentially, actually in this case, literally faceless. They're kind of like blobs. Battling a bunch of literally faceless minions is not terribly compelling after the first 5 or 6. And it just keeps going. There's no real build up as far as getting a next boss level. It's essentially you have a bunch of villains and then the main boss. And I can kind of see why they did that, because we have a bunch of villains. They either shoot, they use swords, they use baseball bats, they do whatever. There would be a lot of visually graphic violence if this was being done to human minions. In this case, they're able to do a lot more with the violence because they're effectively fighting these blob creatures. And so I understand why they went that direction. It's just much less compelling as far as a fight goes. The other big problem I noticed as this movie's going on is there's a lot of very internal tension within the movie itself on what it's trying to be, tone-wise. Obviously, there was a bunch of backlash from Batman v Superman, especially to its very dour, serious tone with very little comic relief, very little levity. So it was pretty well reported that there were some last-minute reshoots on this film after Batman v Superman came out and was panned by a lot of people. I'm not going to speculate on what was changed, what might have been added, but it really does feel like this movie was born to be a darker, not necessarily dour, serious like Batman v Superman, but a grittier, darker version than what we got. There seems to be a lot more comedy added in, and it's not jarring, but taken as a whole, it just feels like there was a lot of growing pains at times on where this film was trying to find its tone, and it never, the finished product never quite reached an equilibrium with that. And that could be because of those extra scenes. I will say, if you're going into this looking for Deadpool-level comedy, you're going to be disappointed. This is not a straight-up comedy. This is a dark at times, gritty action movie with some hilarious characters, and they have those moments, but this is not that laugh-out-loud comedy level that you're going to get from, like, Deadpool. And I don't think that would have worked for this. I think this movie is pretty close to being a really good movie, with a better polished script, a more defined villain, and a more clear tone. I think this really could have been a great film. That all being said, I still enjoyed this. The performances are excellent. Will Smith, Margo Robbie, Viola Davis as Amanda Waller, she was perfect as Amanda Waller. Having been a fan of the Justice League cartoon from the 90s, I had a very particular view of what Amanda Waller should be like, and she nailed the personality of Amanda Waller. Harley Quinn, I've only ever seen or heard her voice in the cartoons, and she did a good job emulating that version from the cartoon, but giving it a darker live action edge to it. Will Smith, he had some of the most emotional scenes of the movie. And Joel Kinnaman as Rick Flag, I've liked him in most things I've seen him in, and I thought he was great in this as well. Now, it's obvious that not all of the characters got the same treatment as others did. Specifically, Captain Boomerang gets no backstory other than the fact that he's a thief. Never really explained if he's actually a metahuman or just good with knives and boomerangs. Same with Killer Croc. He has sort of a gimmick that looks like a crocodile and eats people, but we really don't get any real character development with him. And I have to say, the few times that he talked, visually he was great, but the few times that he talked, the sound editing, I don't know what it was, just didn't quite work with him. But I couldn't help but think that some of the time that was devoted to the Joker side plot could have been taken away and given to them to give us a more rounded team. Now, one other thing I do want to point out that I did like about this movie is, with the possible exception of Deadpool, which had a very specific comic book that it was trying to emulate, of the major comic book releases that we've gotten in this new era of X-Men and MCU and now this new DC cinematic universe, this film felt more like a comic book than just about any of those other films. It felt more willing to be that sort of over-the-top craziness. We have metahumans, we have deadly assassins, we have magic on multiple levels. When Katana is first introduced, Rick Flag very nonchalantly mentions, "Don't let her kill you because her sword contains the souls of everyone that it's killed." That's not something that we've seen in these mainstream comic book movies. I mean, take the MCU, for example. We're 13, 14 movies in, and then this November we're going to get Doctor Strange, and that's the first time we're going to have true magic. It's taken 13, 14 films for them to feel willing to go there with that. And here, it's just thrown out there, yeah, we have a guy that can create fire. We have a guy that looks like a crocodile. We have a ancient witch spirit. We have a sword that can contain souls. I have to give them props for just going with it and just saying this is a comic book movie. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it, because it's not something that I've necessarily been looking for, but it's something that I didn't realize how much I was missing with some of these other films that I really enjoyed, but were definitely more grounded. So overall, Suicide Squad, very well acted, great characters. The characters who do get development do get very good development, where I actually care about what's going to happen to them during the course of this movie. There is definitely an inequality to some of the characters not getting much at all development. Most of the problems here come with the script. It's, as I said before, a relatively weak, kind of blah villain, and a lot of just ridiculousness as far as plot developments from A to B to C to D. I mean, if you think about this movie too hard, yeah, it's not going to make sense. So don't think too hard. Just go in, and I think you're going to enjoy it. It's not Deadpool. Don't go in thinking that you're going to get that level of humor. But if you're looking for just sort of a slightly off-kilter, in a crazy sort of way, action, superhero, supervillain movie, I think you're going to have a good time with this. I did. I would not mind seeing it again. Like I said, I think there could have been some polishing here or there, both script and tone, where they could have elevated this to a really great movie. But like I said, it's a decent movie that provides quality entertainment, and I have no regrets going to see it. Obviously, there's been a lot of varied opinions coming out about this movie this week, so I would like to know what you think. Please comment below if you agree with me on any of the counts that I made, especially about the Joker. I'm curious to see if I'm in the vast minority on this. I talked to one friend, and he essentially agreed with me, so I'm very curious about that. As always, you can subscribe to my channel, check out some of my other reviews, and until next time, I'll see you at the movies.